Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Addy Ads Attican. I'm here with the one and only George Webb, investigative journalist. We will be joined shortly by Mr. Johnson, Brad Johnson, former CIA chief of station at various stations around the world. We've spoken with him once before, and I've spoken with him before that as well. Our chat with George and Brad, Mr. Johnson, had a bit of a bad connection a couple weeks ago with the big storm that hit the East Coast. But George just got off the phone with FJ and wants to share what he just talked to FJ about. But how are you doing this morning, George?
Well, great. Addie and I are both in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, on our way. We're about 8 miles away from each other. I was over there where Addie is at the home of one of our contributors here in Myrtle Beach, trying to keep costs down. So, Addie, you're not living it up over there, are you? Oh,
sorry about that. Yeah, not yet, George. I'm waiting for everybody to get here. Actually, I had a very productive day yesterday, but we hung out a bit last night and just trying to catch up with a lot of admin work and reaching out to people. I found various testimonies of voter fraud, particularly from Michigan, posted on a YouTube channel, and I reached out to several people there, and I'm hoping that they do get back to me because I would love to get them to share what they saw on the morning of the 4th with us on our channels. But those videos are on the internet. They have been taken down a few times, and it's just something I think we should spread out as far as getting on more and more channels, these testimonials and kind of video informal deposition, shall we say, of what happened those early morning hours of the 4th when so many people fell asleep and the operation happened around 3:30 there, 3:45 a.m. So we're hoping people get back to us there. We have a lawyer that is likely going to talk to George and myself from Michigan as well on Thursday. So hopefully that pans out. I will get back to her today to finalize our chat there. But we hope to talk about the Kraken release today and as well the supposed seizure of servers by the German and American militaries in Germany of the servers. I believe the Dominion servers was claimed. Now, I talked to George a bit before our chat today about it. He is leaning towards it being a distraction of some sort. I don't know if your thoughts have expanded on that, George.
sure. So, what we do is we collect the information, right? And then we cross-reference the information. We do the digging on the information. And I was talking to Paul Cottrell late last night, getting the IP addresses for Dominion, and the Dominion IP addresses where we had all the trouble. Now we're following where all the trouble was, all the red Ferraris at 3:45 a.m. after the polls closed that show up with 138,000 votes, and it says Warren Flood on the license plate. That's where we're following up, and those are Dominion systems, not this Cital systems. There's Brad. So,
and Mr. Johnson has just joined us. Looks like we got a good connection this time. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. I always enjoy speaking with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, Brad, let me lead in with the first question. I'm George Webb. We're all down here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. You've seen
Myrtle Beach is very nice. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, we're heading to Georgia because of this Dominion voting system, and we're going to be interviewing people in Georgia. And we have been doing sort of some forensic analysis and mapping back to these IP addresses that map to Belgrade, Serbia, which most Americans are shocked to find out that there's 51 programmers in Belgrade, Serbia that are doing their election systems in Georgia and all these other places we've had trouble, like Detroit, Michigan. And then the hardware is assembled. We don't know it's actually where it's manufactured, the various pieces in Canada. Again, people are surprised that there's a NATO partner running our election hardware. So what have you heard about this whole Dominion thing, and then there's Seidel, this other company, and your reactions as a CIA guy?
Excuse me. Well, first let me say all of that appears to be true. Now there's some details that kind of come up as rumors that are not necessarily true, and in some cases those rumors are brought about by detractors who are trying to make the whole thing look like tinfoil hat sort of conspiracy theory things. So I frankly have taken a little bit different tact on this. I don't think these details, or let me put it this way, we're way past the point where all of these details make much difference. All of this work was already completed, and it's been completed by the people that needed to do it. And the president, his legal team, and the lawyers involved, and Giuliani and Sidney and these people that we're seeing are the tip of the iceberg of that effort. And clearly DOJ, Department of Justice, has been involved in some ways. So all of that is already completed. Now we're going to see what they got and how far it goes. That's, to me, where we're at right now. So all the stuff in Germany, it may or may not be a distraction, as you had noted was a possibility before. It is a possibility. It also might be just a little bit of icing on the cake to complete a proof process that they need for court. It could be a lot of little things out there, none of which make that much difference at this point, because as I said, we're already past that stage. So now it's what do we have and what can we prove with it? And I would divide the court cases into two. We've got the civilian court cases that are out there, where the legal team, that's kind of the public arena that we're seeing. And some of those cases have better chances. Some of them have lesser chances. But are they going to win the presidency for Donald Trump by themselves? They could, but probably not. So again, I wouldn't. Those are going to play forward as they play forward. It's just going to depend on the judge and what's all there and all of that. Too late to have much impact on any of that. The other half of it is the criminal cases. That is where the important stuff is, if you will. And again, all of that criminal information was already collected. It's already being processed. What everybody's saying here, I'm just outside of Washington, D.C. What everybody's saying here in the Trump camp is that every I is being dotted, every T is being crossed, every comma is being double checked to make sure it's in the right place, and that criminal proceedings will take place. And the two places we're hearing most, which again, it's hard to predict these things because they also evolve and change, but Arizona and Pennsylvania are the places that appear likely to lead the charge on the if you will, in the criminal arena. And if it can be shown, and all the data is supposedly out there that shows what all the original votes were in the forensic data that's available, what the original information was, and then how it was manipulated, where it was manipulated, who manipulated it, and what the outcome was based on that. So if that's shown to be true in the criminal case, it's done. It's over, because you will then be required to go back to the original information, and Trump wins all the elections. There's 7 states that are outstanding, that if all of those go forward in that fashion, then all 7 of those states will go to be a Trump victory, and he'll be in the 400 range for electoral college. So this is what this is what's going to play out now at this point. We can dig in and find bits and pieces of it that may or may not be important or useful. Don't know, but whatever's in their hands now is what they have to go forward, and we'll see. But I would put a very high probability that Trump is going to be inaugurated in January, based on these criminal cases. If it turns out that DOJ has betrayed the president and Barr is playing lip service to all this and never intends to do a damn thing, then he has well and truly taken that blade and placed it in Trump's back all the way to the heart, and Biden will be elected. So that, to me, is the key issue: is what's Barr going to do with this stuff? And I would say everyone, all of us, are a little bit nervous about Barr because he's never actually done anything on any of these things to date. He purposely held off on the Durham investigation of FISA and all of those things because of elections, which is not an unreasonable argument. But then on the other hand, he didn't really do anything with it when he could have probably long ago. Now, again, what everybody's saying is he just kept uncovering more and more and more. There is evidence to support that in that Durham, his investigation rented more office space and hired more people. So it is logical that as they dug in, they kept finding more and more and more corruption. So this to me is the question that has to be answered. Is DOJ going to support justice or corruption? And I'm at the 80%, 70, 80% that they're going to support justice, but I worry a great deal about that last 20 or 30%.
Well, I sent Addie this clip, Mr. Johnson, and it's by a guy named Russell Ramsland. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'll play a little of the clip here, and then I'll have Addie bring it up in a better format.
The story I'm about to take you on is really just tracking the journey that we made over the last 2 years. We have funded all of this ourselves. And it's been an entirely internal investigation, just because we all have kids and we're concerned about the country.
Okay,
where we're going to go.
Can you hear that? Did you hear that?
Take it away, Russ.
Did you hear that?
Some of it, I'm afraid
Well,
if you could just it for me, please.
Yeah, we'll have Addie cue it up and play it in the player, so you can hear it. But it's a guy named Russell Ramsland. Russell Ramsland runs an investigative agency in Texas. We work with an attorney. Can you hear me, Brad? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Russell Ramsland works with an attorney. It works with Sidney Powell, and he's an investigative agency that's been looking into fraud, and they have brought a criminal indictment. As you mentioned, the information they provided led to a criminal indictment in Texas. So
I saw that.
Okay, yeah. So the information that we got from our sort of attorney in residence on our network news, is in contact with them. He goes by the moniker Farmer Jones, but he's a well-known attorney on the internet, and he is saying that this group did an in-depth analysis, and this Russell Ramsland, of the Dominion system, where it seems to be all the trouble is occurring in Wayne County in Michigan, Fulton County in Atlanta, Maricopa County in Arizona, Clark County in Nevada. So, and basically a forensic analysis saying there's no safeguards. There's 6 different entry points. I did the analysis from the DEF CON conference that was done, a 50-page paper, which talked about 4 areas of access, but no safeguards. I looked at the NATO report from the NATO team that said that it was full of holes and no safeguards. So we're seeing kind of this Dominion system being kind of ramrodded into Georgia for the June primaries, and then getting, even though all this report came out from these white hats in Las Vegas in October, September, saying it's full of holes, it was ramrodded forward in these critical areas where we had after poll closing voting. Do you see this as smoke? Where there's smoke, there's fire? Is this the direction you think that you would be going if you were investigating this from the CIA's point of view, or the FBI?
Well, I guess I would. The CIA's perspective is a little different than the FBI's perspective. The FBI and DOJ and any kind of law enforcement is trying to find information to investigate and lead to a conviction for somebody in a court of law. So they require not just proof, but a certain standard of proof. So that's one thing. In the CIA, we don't care about any of that. I mean, all we care about is knowing they're guilty. Now, we know the system's bogus. We know the system's being manipulated. There are no doubts of any of that. It's been shown over and over and over and over by lots of things. You have the pro-Biden people who don't care. They want their boy to win no matter what happens. So They are perfectly willing to overlook the illegalities involved in all of this because that's who they are. The Democratic Party and that progressive philosophy, the socialist communist philosophy, is corrupt by its nature. And it's the party uber alles, ahead of everyone and everything. So it's that corruption to them doesn't matter. Now, to all of us law-abiding patriots and citizens of the United States of America, this is very important. So now the CIA perspective on that is we know they're guilty, so it's go dig out who they are and, have them taken care of by local authorities, like you could argue happened in Germany and all of those sorts of things. You want to go after and destroy the system. Now, this system we know is bogus. This indictment that took place out in Texas it's only useful. Trump won Texas, so it's only useful if it is the first round going off in the war. If it's the shot across the bow, it's useful. If it's anything other than that, it has zero impact and it's not helpful. It has to be the opening round of this war. And make no mistake, this is in essence a civil war. And the fighting in the streets hasn't started wholesale yet, but that's where this is headed. And this is all caused and brought about and organized by the extreme left. And we've all seen Antifa and Black Lives Matter. We've all seen that it's covered up. The violence from the left has been covered up from a long time ago. And there's a report that comes out called TEVUS, T-E-V-U-S, which is terrorist activities in the U.S. And we did a 200 and some odd page study on our website by one of the senior fellows at AIR, and just went through and proved beyond any doubt that the information that's out there is bogus. Did you know that because of TEVUS, and everyone's always talking about right-wing violence, did you know that 9/11 is considered right-wing violence? 9/11 by Saudi Arabian radical Islamists, that is considered right-wing violence. If you look at the TEVUS report, all of those individuals who are Saudi, with the exception of one, and radical Islamists, are categorized as white non-Hispanics. And that's what lets the U.S. government skew these numbers so that it looks like right-wing violence is the problem here. And we've got, nut job left-wing FBI guys that are retired out there saying, these connections between right-wing extremists and local law enforcement is a real problem and all that. This is that civil war being shaped up. It's being pushed by the left and prepared. And just as we saw, we had that demonstration here in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, and they were peacefully marching. And I can't really read that.
Sorry, let me get a little closer. Is that TEVUS? Is that what?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great. I just want to make
if you look, yes, and as I said, if you look on the website intelreform.org, you'll see this 200 and some odd page reports that blows that whole thing out of the water. And another thing on that TEVUS report, here's an interesting thing. 9/11. Yes, that's it. Thank you. 9/11 is categorized as right-wing violence. Antifa and Black Lives Matter are not mentioned ever. And yet this weekend in Washington, D.C., we saw them attack innocent people sitting in a restaurant, throwing firecrackers at them. We saw all of that stuff. That's the website. Yes, that's correct. Thank you. That I recognize easily. I see that one enough. So, all of this stuff, my take on all of this is you have to look at the overall pattern here. These details of the legal process and what they're doing is not as important as what we see in the overall take. And clearly, Antifa, sorry, hay fever is getting me, so that's why the cough, so forgive me all. Antifa, for example, I've got my water here. Thank you. Antifa, for example, has been preparing over the last several years and has sent troops to fight in Syria and the fights there, working with Islamic jihadist groups. And I've done a number of interviews on that. There's a lot of photographs on the internet of them holding up their flags next to them. So there's ample, absolutely conclusive proof of all of this. Now, why? Why would Antifa want combat trained and experienced troops? There's only one reason, because they're preparing for civil war in the streets, while all of the people like us, what we want to do is follow the laws and the Constitution. So the other side, as I said, they want to provoke this. They are going to be very happy if Trump actually wins the election, because it lets them unleash everything. And that's precisely what we're going to see happen. And in these areas, here's the problem. In these areas that are controlled by Democrats, Antifa and Black Lives Matter are going to run nuts. They're going to burn down buildings and businesses, all those things unchecked. The government's not going to stop them. So what happens? Will the federal government step in? Can the federal government step in? What will happen? Because if no one does anything, people are going to stand up and defend themselves. Now, of course, they've already laid the groundwork to blame them for right-wing extremist violence, blah, blah, blah. That's already going to be prepared and laid on. So that's how we're going to see this unfold, as I said. For me, and you mentioned on this, George, earlier, that it's okay if we use first names, if that's all right.
Absolutely,
Okay, good. The next battle for this, as I see it, the court cases are either won or lost. We just haven't heard yet. The next big battle is precisely what you were saying in Georgia. The Democrats are lining up to do precisely the same game as they were doing in each of these states. And if you look back, the governor of Arizona was saying months ago that this is what the Democrats were lining up to do in Arizona, and they did it. Now, can justice prevail and we go back to what the actual results were and have Trump win this state as in accordance with the actual voting of the people or not? That remains to be seen. But then are they going to be allowed to run free and do precisely the same thing in Georgia? I think it's going to be tough, especially if we see some indictments, because if memory serves, those elections aren't till January when the runoff elections take place in Georgia. Yeah. So I think we're going to have to see some indictments here in the next couple of weeks, and that entire system be thrown suspect and be thrown out of Georgia. At that point, Democrats have no chance of winning. It's over at that point, and both those seats will go Republican. That's where our main effort right now is for AIR, and we've gotten a certain level of funding, and we weighed in kind of, as you would expect, former CIA guy. I mean, we're not leading the charge in a particularly public fashion. We're trying to do all this sort of behind the scenes and buried in the statistics because that's where these things are won and lost nowadays. So we're going forward in that way, a little bit of stealth, if you will, and trying to impact these elections as best we can on a whole range of ways, because this is it. We need Trump in the White House for the next 4 years, and we need these 2 Senate seats in Republican hands. And as long as the laws are followed, we're safe on all that. It's the question is, how much will corruption get away with against us? And it's certainly going to be an interesting period of time between now and January.
So Addie, I put in the video chat, in the YouTube chat, I put the Rams Land video, if you want to cue that. And I know that you were a station chief, Mr. Johnson, around the world in many different theaters. So I don't know if you spent much time in the Eastern European theater or not, but there was an organization we were tracking called OTPUR, OTPUR.
Oh, yes, I'm very familiar with OTPUR. Yeah, they staged the original revolution against Milosevic in Serbia. Quite familiar. The symbol of the black fist that's most commonly used. That has been picked up by all sorts of people. In fact, I have their book, might be on the shelf behind me, but I have the OTPUR book here around me somewhere.
The OTPUR manual or operations manual. And you're familiar with the color revolutions that they tend to do the psychological operations for. Arab Spring in Egypt and in Tunisia, they did psychological operations, Libya, etc. Again, when we find that Dominion, their 50 programmers are in the same Belgrade offices, they're sharing office space. I mean, they're not continuously in the same, but they're in the same office building. it gives you pause, as if I'm thinking like a CIA guy now, I think, just saying, hey, they're on the same, maybe I'm not, but they're in the same network, the Serbian broadband network. They have the same access to the same IP ranges, same routers, physical access. So as a CIA station chief, where would you go from? I'm this junior cub CIA agent out in the field collecting this information. Yeah.
Well, gold star so far for you. Otpor, as I mentioned, started out with the revolution against Milosevic and succeeded. So it became quite famous. And then, as you pointed out correctly, spread from there and has gone out. Now, those guys, that manual and the people that were involved in that, the main leader of Otpor, which, if memory serves, I think means resist. I've kind of forgotten now out of the Serbo-Croatian, but that movement has basically prostituted themselves, if you'll allow me that term, at this point, and they sell out to the highest bidder. That's all they are, is a straight up mercenary group now, and there's no philosophy behind what they do other than, you pay us, we'll help you, that sort of thing. And by the way, if you look closely, Black Lives Matter has received training from Otpor, which they had to have a lot of money to pay for all of that, and they're even using that painted symbol of the fist thing. You'll see that on a lot of the Black Lives Matters things. So it is certainly now become part of this overall progressive socialist communist movement out there. And the Otpor revolutionary style is quite good. Those things work, and unfortunately we're kind of ill prepared to fight against a lot of that stuff, because nature of the beast, if you're a conservative, it's like, go do your own thing, live your own life, be self-reliant, self-responsible. So it's a problem we're faced with.
It's a message from Connie, Otpor leader.
That's an interesting little tidbit.
Arrested that day and released from amnesty after being detained for 8 hours. And Otpor
interesting.
Was very left-leaning, as I understand, radical left, before they went to mercenary road.
Well, I would say they're just mercenary. I mean, they're just for hire. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, agreed. Now, of course, who's hiring them? I mean, and that's, I think your other point on this is it's the left that's hiring them, and so they're leftists. But yeah, if the Republican Party wanted to hire them and paid them enough, I'm sure they would happily come over and work for the Republican Party. They don't care. They're just, it's the money.
Well, we've tracked them for 4 years, and we've looked at the money. And there's an Open Society Foundation with George Soros has been a key funder of them, and a lot of very famous authors that follow. William Engdahl has tracked the money trail for Ukraine and the Maidan 2014. So they just seem to rear their ugly head every election. And like you mentioned, Black Lives Matter training, also Antifa training for terrorist activities, especially in the psychological operations, the publications of websites, the radio, the television, all these things. And it seems like they work with a Ukrainian oligarch by the name of Kolomoisky frequently for when they need to do on the ground, boots on the ground type operations. So it seems to be one of these things that we're going to have to deal with every 2 years if we don't deal with it right now. So let's deal with it right now.
Agreed across the board. And I would say this has been a fairly long problem in coming. It's taken many years to build everything up to the point that we see it now. And it's this incrementalism that's been used by the left against us forever. And I would specifically go back to Jimmy Carter. And if you look at a lot of what was done, Jimmy Carter is the one that created the Department of Education. And what happened as soon as we got the Department of Education program in the United States took a hard swing to the left, and we started to see these different programs that would come up out of the Department of Education. But essentially, it's led to the dumbing down and the politicization towards the left of our educational system, and that's pervasive from preschool to all the way through the university system now. And we've seen China, for example, make huge inroads. There's multiple schools here in the area that are funded out of China that are great academically, so it's very attractive to parents, but it teaches Chinese, leftist philosophy and all of those things to these children starting in preschool. And the inroads that they've made with their communist, ideology and the money and influence and all that stuff is almost overwhelming what they've done here in the United States. And Trump is the first guy to actually really start to fight back in an organized fashion, and gave a directive in 2018 to the FBI to start working back against, from counterintelligence perspective or counter-espionage perspective, to start fighting back against the Chinese. And that's where we've seen all these arrests. If you're paying attention, we've seen a lot of people get thrown out of universities and the institutes, and this college professor that was the head of the chemistry department at, was it Stanford? I've forgotten now, but I think it was Stanford. Okay, and he's sitting in jail now for espionage, spying for the Chinese. And those all are a result of an organized effort on the part of, fortunately, the FBI doing some good work on the orders of President Trump. So it's key to keep doing all of these things. The inroads against us, the organized effort over many decades, the incrementalism used in the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, the Department of State, and now the rest of the federal agencies that have been bureaucratized and the leadership turned into these left-leaning political hacks, so that we see things happen like what we've seen with the FISA, where DOJ and FBI and CIA and a number of people at the leadership level got together and flat out used the powers of the federal government to target political opposition in the form of candidate Trump and later President Trump. And all of this stuff, these things that they're doing on an organized effort are treason. This is sedition. And if it was just an isolated guy like that guy that was indicted out in Texas, if that's all it was, okay, one guy, he gets indicted, goes to jail, and is that the guy?
That's Lieber, yeah, that you mentioned. Yeah, the
okay.
Harvard professor, Lieber, yeah.
Charles.
Oh, yeah, okay. And but if this truly is these machines used in these 7 states, all 7 states at the prearranged time kicked out all the Republicans and said they're starting counting and all of that, that's not just people breaking the law. That is part of an organized effort to overthrow the U.S. government. And at that point, now this has been talked about more and more. I've been bringing this up for the last, I don't know, year and a half or so, and so I've been now I'm kind of the show prep for the rest of the United States on some of these issues. But this is one of those things. If indeed those things can be proven as part of an organized effort in the United States of America, then that certainly meets the thresholds of sedition and treason. If that's the case, then I really hope somebody in government has the balls, and forgive me for being a little crude, but I really hope somebody has the balls to use the full weight of the law against them. And that would certainly include including the penalty of death, because the only way you're going to stop these guys ever is to use some fairly draconian legal measures. Because if all these guys, if a Secretary of State for a certain state is involved in attempting to overthrow the government, the federal government, through corruption of elections and gets the death penalty, that will put the fear of God in these people for a very long time. They'll always hate it and so on, but it's going to put the fear in them, knowing that they're going to have to go meet their maker if they want to play these games. And that is the only way we're going to fix these problems. So it's my fervent hope that if indeed all of this is true, if indeed it all can be proven, that the full weight of the law, and I mean the full weight of the law, is brought down on the shoulders of these people. And I don't see how this can be anything other than essentially a full-scale organized revolution. And how can it be anything else? What circumstances would allow another scenario to be true? Because there's nothing apparent here. I mean, even look at Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They're the brown shirts. they are indeed the Nazi brown shirts. They're the stormtroopers that are used internally, politically, precisely as the brown shirts were by the Nazis, which the irony involved in all this is just stunning. You know, they claim to be anti-fascist. And of course, the Nazis, a socialist party, but the Nazis were fascist. And they claim to be anti-fascist, but are precisely what they say that they fight against. They do exactly the same tactics, same methodologies, similar organization, everything. It's the irony involved in all of this is just stunning to me. But we've got a number of real problems with all of this, and that is the stuff that I'm talking about should be self-evident. I don't think there's anything particularly tricky here or something that anyone would look at and go, well, there's a big hole in the story. We don't know this or that or the other. None of that really exists. All of this, anyone paying attention or just kind of looking at it with kind of minimal effort, there's just the conclusions are fairly inescapable. But yet, this isn't hitting the American public at large. The outrage is there among Trump supporters, but you have this huge swath of people that just don't care and don't look at it. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, Brad, I'm going to say Brad rather than Mr. Johnson.
Please do. Yeah.
I have a specific question on. I know you didn't specifically work counterintelligence with the FBI and election interference. I know you were overseas doing activities with CIA, but I do want to ask a question because I mean, if I was working for you as a field agent, I would be saying, okay, how did they do it in 2016? And then looking at the kind of the modus operandi and then applying that for clues, looking for clues in 2020. And in 2016, the foreign actors, whoever they were, and who knows how much help they got from the DNC, but the foreign actors used a piece of malware called X-Agent, which allowed a harvesting of credentials, of administrator credentials. And then they used that exploit to then put in a malware which sort of operated as a command and control center, an electronic command and control center, which then they could launch other attacks. So they bridged the air gap, if you will. And then once they were inside, they could run that from anywhere. They could launch all sorts of different harvesting, and they got like 7 or 8 different logins, I believe. And then that's how they got the email. And when you look at this Mr. Ramsland's interview, and I realize you haven't had a chance to see that yet, he talks about a piece of malware being in the Dominion code, which I don't know for sure that it's X-Agent yet or not, but if X-Agent can be used also in a way to harvest information for web analytics, and I used to work with a company that used X-Agent a lot, so I see when somebody says this malware that from 2016 was in the DNC server, and that was used to do this operation. And then I see it again in the Dominion system, knowingly this piece of malware that is the precursor to running these operations. I'm like, hey, I would say, hey, boss, this is 2016 all over again.
I think there's no doubt whatsoever that all that's true. As I said, this has been prepared incrementally over and over. I think there's little doubt that there's levels of cooperation that's taking place between all of these things. The Democratic Party, the DNC, remember those Pakistani guys that were doing all the programming for everybody on the Hill, and they were let go. Why? You know, they just were allowed to flee off to Pakistan and all of that and never pushed. And this DNC server that was supposedly hacked by Russia, and that's the grand proof that that this whole Russia fiasco was kicked off against Trump, all of those things. You know, the only people that say that are the DNC people. You know, nobody else knows. They hired some private company to look at it, but what's the private company going to say? You know, if the DNC goes to him and says, go look at this and tell us that the Russians did it. Oh, okay. Then how much are you going to pay us? Yes, the Russians did this. That's going to be their report because they're paid to say it. They're whatever they're told to say. So The FBI was never allowed to look at it. There was no outside observer ever allowed to look at it. I mean, there's just thing after thing after thing after thing, like what you're mentioning there, the same malware that's in these systems. I literally view this as a growing organized effort that has encompassed more and more groups to help in this process of overthrowing the United States, and probably goes up to and including former President Obama.
Well, Mr. Brad, you lead a group of folks, and Eddie, I'm sorry, I'll let you ask your question. You set up the meeting, but you lead a group of folks at American Intelligence Reform that is, I look at sort of like our FBI guy. He was a guy who kind of inspired us. We call him McDuff. He was this FBI guy who worked for Hoover and was trying to fight against the overthrow of Kennedy. And you seem to lead this kind of group for CIA guys. And we are looking to guys like you to be the check because we've got this Peter Strzok group inside the FBI counterintelligence that's not only not looking at these obvious attacks like ex-agent, but they're actually bringing these people in.
Yeah, that's all true. It is all true. And yes, I would agree. I mean, certainly one of the roles I have taken on doing this is precisely what you lay out right there. And this corruption that we've seen within the senior levels of the intelligence community, which does include both the FBI and CIA, is just overwhelming. And
there's your website.
Oh yeah, that's my website again. Yeah.
I just wanted to show that this is a group of people who are sort of like McDuffs. McDuff's our word for using for people who see a great wrong and they're inside a big corrupt thing, and they have to be whistleblowers, and sometimes they have to be surreptitious whistleblowers because they know they'll be crushed if they come out like John Kiriakou. If he comes out and blows the whistle, he's the only guy who ends up going to prison.
Yeah, there certainly is a fine line, and I mean, I will say I am not interested in blowing any classified information, and I'm not interested in harming like the CIA per se or the intelligence community. I'm not interested in harming them. What I want to do is bring them back to the level of glory that existed before. And I talk about this. There was a time not that long ago when the CIA, from an intelligence perspective, was able to go toe-to-toe with essentially the rest of the world. I mean, the CIA alone was essentially able to go toe-to-toe with the rest of the world on intelligence issues. Well, those days are long gone. You know, we're a poor shadow of what we once were. That is my goal, is to bring all of that back, greater glory. The problem is that leadership doesn't view it that way. And just speaking of the CIA alone for a moment, although this carries over to almost every other federal agency in the intelligence community, has been damaged from a long period of time, beginning with Carter and finalized essentially under Obama through this incrementalism and the modernization that Obama did, for example, where he did create some new organization having to do with technical issues, technical means of collection, and those, forgive me, those sorts of things. But what he also did was completely disband the operations cadre. The operations cadre is where espionage takes place. And anyone who tells you we don't need espionage is naive or an idiot or so political they don't care, they want to lie about it. I mean, that is a very stupid thing for anyone to argue. Yet we have many people that support that. John Brennan himself basically said, we don't do espionage anymore in a famous NPR interview. Got a lot of pushback and then went, well, what I really meant was this, but that's not what he really meant. What he really meant is he got rid of operations, and that's what he's done. That expertise that still exists in the old, retiree farts that are still out there alive is dying. Those lessons were learned based on OSS in World War II, where a lot of people died. And we took those things and built upon them and created the strongest intelligence agency in the world, bar none. All of those lessons were learned literally through blood, sweat, and tears. And now they're all being flushed down the toilet by these ignoramuses who happen to still be in charge of the CIA. And by the way, they get They do feel these barbs as I throw them out there, and there has been a support growing for this sort of thing. So among the intelligence community, you do see some burgeoning support for those, idiots at the tip of the spear who point this stuff out. So these criticisms are being felt. The problem is nobody's doing anything. Now, the president has been passing down the right orders. He's, somebody there, I don't know who, but at NSC is saying what needs to be done. It's what happens when those orders are received and, resisted or bypassed, or they play, service to them, but don't actually do them. All those sorts of things where they're saying, oh yeah, operations are all back up intact. It's great stuff. We're doing great. But there's more. Unfortunately, I can't talk about that in any detail, but there's a lot more BS than there is fact in a lot of what's going on out there. And that scares the hell out of me. I mean, that literally scares the hell out of me. I think we've gotten a lot of people killed on the incompetence that resides there now. And that has to be turned around. It just has to be turned around. The world is getting more dangerous, not less dangerous. And we need a robust intelligence community and start shrinking down the overlap that exists out there, start letting people become as great as they once were, go back and look at what worked best and emulate that, and all this, PC nonsense that's out there about, like, for example, I mean, there's always been a thing by the left that somehow espionage is this great evil, philosophically horrible thing that we're out there. Well, okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the world is a tough goddamn place, and you got to take some tough choices and make some tough moves. That's a fact. Now, you may not like it, but, I don't give a damn. Go grow up, and then we'll talk about it. So espionage has got to be a part of it. The military's got to be a part of it. Our special forces troops have got to be a part of it. And sometimes you got to go kill people. That's just the way this works. Yeah. And, do I say that's a great thing that we should all want to do? No. But when it's necessary to do, well, God damn it, go do it. And don't cry about it. Just go do it. Take care of business. My rant for the day.
No, that's great. When Addie set up the first meeting, and if people who haven't seen the Addikins meeting that we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we edited it out. After I was on that call with you, Brad, I said if Brad Johnson was running the show, he would have Valerie Plame in there dating Popovic, and we would have all the IP addresses. And the first night that they consummated, she would have had that extracting thumb drive into his laptop, and we would have the whole network. This would have been over on night one, But they, I that's a little bit of a rant on the side for me. But I've always said, you want the Valerie Plame super agent, where she knows petroleum, she knows uranium, she knows everything. She can wear the $5,000 cocktail dress. She can change a tire in the field in the middle of Syria. That super agent, espionage agent that we used to call, and I know this is a side thing, so I won't. Addie, take me away from this. Ask a question to Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry.
You're great, George. No, we all enjoy George taking the lead for sure, but I've heard the various agencies been described as either white hats or black hats, with the CIA and the FBI being black hats, of course, but the Marshals and the DHS as white hats. What do you think about that? Because I know the Marshals, they've been doing a bit of great work, I would say, with saving a handful of trafficked children with Operation Not Forgotten. But what do you think? Are the DHS and the Marshals, they're the white hats more so, and the FBI, CIA, black hats, would you say, Mr. Johnson?
Well, I would set the CIA aside a little bit, because I would set the CIA aside a little bit in this. Yeah, it's not. I would say it's not so clear a distinction in that way. And as I was saying, let me set the CIA aside and talk about kind of the rest of government, and take an organization like the FBI. Is the FBI a black hat organization? Well, leadership, damn straight. There's just no question about it at the leadership level. And Christopher Wray, current FBI Director Christopher Wray, is well and fully and truly over his head, has no clue what he is supposed to be doing. And I don't think he'd want to do it even if he understood everything perfectly. He's a typical swamp dweller, loves the swamp, wants the swamp, and is going to try and protect the swamp. That's how he views his job. So is that all black hat guys and around him and all of that? Yes, it is. That pipeline to leadership for all of federal government, almost all, is the same, and that's tightly politically controlled. It's done through, in federal government, to get promoted past a certain level, not at entry level, but once you get to a certain level of seniority, to get promoted beyond that, there's certain tickets you have to punch, specific things you have to do in order to go to that next level. Now, the promotion panels tend to be good. They're protected, and EEOs, all those protections are there. So the promotions themselves are a pretty good process. But the problem is those jobs that you have to have in order to meet the criteria to be looked at for promotion, those are political. That's how the system is manipulated. So if you want to rise to the senior ranks of the FBI, for example, you have to have certain jobs. But if you're a conservative, you're not going to get that job. If you're not a loyal leftist party member, all of that stuff, you're not going to get the job. And therefore, you're not going to go into that pipeline to leadership, and you're not going to end up in leadership. So that's the problem. That's federal government wide. Now, going down the ranks of the FBI, there's lots of good people in the FBI. There's lots of good people in the Marshal Service, ATF, all of the law enforcement, DEA, all of them. There's lots of good law enforcement people out there that are trying to do good work on all of the issues, like you've mentioned there, child trafficking and all of these different things. And me, personally, I'm actually a big supporter of law enforcement, big supporter of the FBI. I want to take out what is sullying their name. And, we know damn well we can't trust the FBI right now, but not because of FBI rank and file. We can't trust the FBI because of the leadership at the FBI. Look at what they did with Flynn. That does not engender trust in our main principal federal law enforcement agency. That engenders distrust. Yet what was done to fix it? Clearly a problem. But what did Christopher Wray do to fix the problem? And he didn't do a damn thing. He's covering it up, not fixing the problem. You want to engender trust in the FBI, you go fire the ass of those people that did all that stuff, track them all down, and if they broke the law, you put them in jail. If they broke administrative rules, you punish them for it, and certainly fire them all, because that's not the type of thing that should be allowed. And yet, what did he do? Nothing. So that mistrust only continues because you look at that and go, well, leadership is corrupt. They are politically corrupt. He may not be working for the mafia taking payoffs, but he's still corrupt because he's politically corrupt. He's taking some sort of political payoff. When he retires, he'll go get some big job with a big liberal company or something like that and make a lot of money. So there is payoff in that sense. So, that's the core of the problem, the pipeline to leadership and leadership across the board. And let me say, this system was pioneered by the U.S. Department of State Department, the Foreign Service. And following World War II, prior to World War II, State Department was one hell of an organization. Really did stuff. They were important, vital part of the U.S. government and were go-getters. Following World War II, they became fully bureaucratized, and all of these things I've described were implemented and proven, if you will, at State Department, and you saw that. Embassies today, for example, basically they're kind of a forward-based administrative office. An ambassador, they may have connections and go talk to people and stuff. A lot of people want to know the U.S. ambassador. A lot of people want to know the U.S. consul general because of visas, all of those sorts of things. But what do they actually do? And the answer is essentially nothing. They're there to represent the government, yes, which is always the case. But they're essentially there to just do what they're told. And it's not like they're the man in the country or they're the woman, the person in the country. They figure out everything that's going on in that country, know what's important, know what the problems are, report it back to Washington, D.C. so everyone can say, yeah, brilliant analysis of the situation in country X. Yeah, you're right. Here's your list of recommendations. We need to pick one of those and go forward. It's the other way around. Now all of that is handled out of Washington, D.C., every decision, and they only go out to the ambassador or whoever it is in the political section, economic section, and say, well, I want to know this. And they'll send that out. They'll go find out X and send it back. They're in no way part of any decision-making process, which, talk about bass backwards. The guys that are there on the ground and know what's going on have nothing to do with the process. It's all done back in D.C. Well, why? It's because it's a bureaucracy and political. They don't care about what's really going on. They don't care about the truth. All they care about is whatever their politics are. And again, that, as I say, was piloted out of State Department. And from there, it began to spread. And I've observed the bureaucratization process begin at FBI and CIA and many of the different agencies, including DOD. Now, military is a different creature to deal with, so it's handled differently. But you see a lot of left-wing political types at senior level of DOD, like Esper, that was just let go. And now little organizations like the Marine Corps, by comparison, it's kind of different. I mean, they're like more hardcore, organized, smaller group, not as politically prominent, so therefore less targeted. So they tend to be a little aloof of some of this. Big Green, the Army is just so damn big that that you can't help but have some of everything in there. So they're a mixed bag. But we've seen a lot of this stuff carry itself out. Don't forget, they're also members of the intelligence community, and excuse me, and of course significant politically in the United States. And DOD's they're the big budget gorilla, the 600-pound gorilla sitting at the budget table every year. So, they've got to be taken into account. And of course, we all love our military. And, me, I would say, I love the law enforcement guys. I love all those guys. I just want everyone to be back. Warfighters need to be supported. The military needs to be supported, but to do what the military does, not be political. But now generals, I would argue to you that, well, when you get your first star, you automatically get your second star as a general, and then you then compete for third and fourth. I would say there's no such thing as a 3 or 4 star general that's not political now. I don't think that exists, because they're operating at senior levels, and money and budgets and people and all those sorts of things, they're political. It's become the nature of the beast, where that didn't used to be that way. You harken back to General Patton in World War II, and there's many things you can say about him, good or bad. But one of them you cannot say about General Patton is that he was a politician, because he was not. He wanted to go fight the war and win it, and say, okay, that's the next enemy. Let's go get him now while we can beat him. And God bless. Where are those guys?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference between him and Eisenhower. But you mentioned indictments. Who would you like to see indicted, Mr. Johnson? We briefly talked about it before. I think we mentioned Mr. Brennan, Mr. Strzok, but has that expanded? Has that list expanded for you?
Well, yes. I mean, in my mind, everyone involved in what I call the FISA fiasco, but everyone involved in getting the original FISA warrant and then targeting candidate Trump and later President Trump, which includes senior DOJ, senior FBI, and senior Obama administration officials. All of those guys, I would say, should be indicted for something along the lines of attempting to overthrow the government. There's different things you could do. Don't care about the details. I mean, not a legal, not a lawyer. So, and I just don't care. As long as they're indicted for one of those things, it's basically life in prison or death penalty or something like that, and gone after in a serious way. And one of the reasons I say that too is as a deterrent for the future for people, which is always part of our legal system. It's one of the reasons, for example, we have the death penalty. Part of the reason to have a death penalty is a deterrent. Yes, society needs to publish people for what they've done, but you also want to stop them from doing it again. And if you can go kill 10 people and get away with it, there'll be more people encouraged to do it. If you know you go kill 10 people or try to overthrow the government and get the death penalty, you're going to think twice. So I would say all of those people need to be thrown into that extreme category, if you will. The Flynn case, for example, now see, that does not meet that threshold in my mind. What they did broke the law, clearly some serious problems in that area, but was that an attempt to overthrow the government? No. They illegally targeted an innocent U.S. citizen and used illegal means to make him look bad and charge him and do all of those things, so they should be punished accordingly. Is that a felony, a misdemeanor? I don't know, but that sort of thing falls into that example, which there's quite a few. Where I would, again, who I would go after in a serious way are, again, all of these people involved in what happened on our elections that just took place. All of those people who conspired and as part of an organized effort to change the outcome of the votes in their different states in order to manipulate the vote to make their candidate win, Biden, versus the actual winner, which is President Trump. Those people, for me, are guilty of sedition, treason, attempt to overthrow the government, whichever of those things you want to call it. So all of those people, I would go, really, really hard after all of those people. Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. Just to follow up. So you asked in our last session, you talked about Gina Haspel and how she was involved in the 2016 operations looking the other way with the Steele dossier. She ran the London office and the London desk and looked the other way during this whole thing. And if we had, if we had this traffic between these these Belgrade operatives, right, and this malware, which is a smoking gun into our election systems, into our Dominion systems, how could she possibly look the other way on this as far as foreign interference? As Trump, as you mentioned earlier, signed the executive order at 13/8/48, which specifically mentioned this foreign interference. A heightened bar, like you said, for foreign interference. Any kind of foreign interference is a treasonous act.
Agreed on all of the above. Now, in the case of Gina Haspel, I don't want to overcharacterize. I don't have proof, for example, or evidence or anything of her guilt or participation in any of this, but it's one of those things that it's deductive reasoning conclusive. She was in London as chief of station. So as chief of station in London, for a senior FBI guy like Peter Strzok or any of those sorts of things to go to London and have meetings with MI5 and MI6, for her to be included is just absolutely the standard. For her not to have been included would be very unusual and raise a lot of eyebrows and get a lot of scrutiny. And we haven't heard of any of that. So there's no reason to think she was not involved. Also, she had previously been chief of station in London and was sent back for a second time as chief of station. Now, again, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. That has happened, through the years. It happens. It's not that weird, but it's not very common either. And it's really not common for a place like London to go back. And yet she was handpicked by John Brennan to go back during that specific period of time to be chief of station in London. And she, of course, was a very trusted, close lieutenant to John Brennan. Out of all of this, one of the things I've been saying over the last 2 years, or 3 years now, if you look at all of these things having to do with this FISA and the bits and pieces that come out, every time a new piece of the puzzle comes out, some aspect of it leads back to John Brennan. And that's why the term I've been using that people have picked up is all roads lead to John Brennan. He is the spider at the center of the web on all of this stuff. And like I say, every time something new comes out, there's an angle back to John Brennan, John Brennan, John Brennan, John Brennan. So now, if, for example, and this is part of my reasoning and theory, if you will, if John Brennan handpicked Gina Haspel to go to London, and if Gina Haspel was involved with the Steele dossier and Peter Strzok and all of these things, getting this organized with the Brits on, how to move this whole plan forward, which it's very reasonable to conclude that that's the case. Then fast forward. So John Brennan's gone. He's out. Mike Pompeo's moved off. Gina Haspel is now the director of the CIA. Well, then that would mean she's guilty as hell and has got a lot of problems out there if this whole thing comes to the surface. So what would she do? Now, again, no, this is not proof of guilt on her part, and I don't know. She certainly has every right to, if it looks bad, every right to her day in court if that's what it entails. But certainly what she would do is dig in and not want any of this stuff to be declassified. And according to the Federalist Society, Gina Haspel is personally the one that is blocking the declassification of a lot of these materials that are out there. Well, that fits the scenario that I'm describing. It fits very nicely, because if John Brennan goes down, if all this is true, if John Brennan goes down, she goes down. So I don't see how she can do anything if all of this is true. I don't see how she could do anything but fight to the bitter end. And she's, according to everybody right now, she's very unpopular with the administration, and probably coming close to the end of her tenure as CIA director one way or another. I don't know that Trump would fire her before he leaves or not, or if he's inaugurated. If I think she would be. I think Director Wray and CIA Director Haspel would both be on a very short list of who goes if Trump's reinaugurated. So, like I said, there's also rumors out there, I don't know for a fact, but that she was interviewed by the Durham investigators. There's also rumors out there that she's lawyered up, which all of this makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying that she couldn't be innocent and do those things, but nevertheless, if you take the whole thing, it certainly makes it look like a bad situation for Haspel. So, and her behavior is consistent with her trying to protect herself. And once you're in, you're in. That's the problem with getting involved with political corruption like this. Once you're in, she's in John Brennan's pocket forever. She has no way out. She's either going to go down with him, or nothing happens. If Biden's in there, this will all go away. So I'm sure that Haspel is doing everything that she possibly can. And again, you start going back to these rumors of CIA people being involved with these voting machines and all of that, which, if true, it's consistent with this, like I say, this scenario I'm laying out for you. Why would the CIA be involved in stuff like that? Well, because if CIA Director Haspel is guilty of cooperating with all of those things to target Trump, candidate and later president, working for John Brennan, then she's got to do all this stuff. She has to try to essentially overthrow the government and get Biden in, or she's toast. So, as I say, this whole thing is consistent. Again, I have no proof. Can't say categorically that is the case. It's just analyzing the data as we see it, and I'm, like I say, I don't know what's in second place, but whatever it is, there's a lot of holes in that story, because the first thing that's laid out there fits all the criteria. So kind of Occam's razor, whatever the answer that seems to fit all the details is, that's even if it seems unlikely that the CIA would get involved with such stupid plots, it makes sense. One of the other things I've said, if you just look at the operation that was put together to target Trump with the ambassador, the guy from Malta, and the professor, and all of these guys talking and dropping this information and to Carter Page, and how they were going to try to arrest him coming back into the States with all this money. If you look at it from my perspective as a career operator, I look at that whole thing and go, geez, what an amateurish parade of crap. I mean, who approved that op if that's what they were putting together? And I look at it and go, well, John Brennan. That's typical of what I would expect out of John Brennan, who operationally, can't find his own rear end with both hands. So it just, like I said, even that detail, some dumbass plan of that nature put together by a dumbass operator like John Brennan fits. It all fits. So I just look at the whole thing, and that's why from 3 years ago I was laying all this out. saying exactly how this was going to play out because of looking at it and knowing just how those sorts of things worked based on experience. And so far, everything I've said, all the stuff I predicted from 3 years ago has proven true. We're just seeing it all play out over and over and over and over. So we'll see. Well, the culmination will be the Durham investigation.
Yeah. Well, we try not to put too much faith into any one source, and we try to dig as much as we can. And we want you to get to South Carolina and meet in person so we can get you away from that hay fever. I just made the 6-hour drive, and you wouldn't believe how much drier it is down here. So you're going to love it. It's not that swamp that you're getting too close to. But anyway,
I'm always pleased to go to Myrtle Beach. So any excuse to go to Myrtle Beach is going to be, high on my list, as long as you don't have, the red tide. As long as there's no red tide on the beach, then I'm good to go.
Addie, we're going to go down with our sampling thing to the ocean and check that out. And I'll get Addie into a follow-up here, but these certification of these elections by these secretaries of state, and there is a constitutional responsibility that citizens have, as well as the various governments have, the state representatives have, to enjoin, to issue an injunction against the Secretary of State if there's significant voter fraud. Now, normally the Attorney General gets involved in overseeing the state election process. The FBI is the investigative body. But we believe that we can enjoin or ask for temporary injunctive relief to the secretaries of state for certifying an election where there's significant fraud. It's sort of like if you have a dead body under the carpet, you can't sell the house until we figure out what the murder is with the dead body, right? You can't say, okay, we're going to certify this election now with this massive fraud. If there's this malware from a foreign operator in our election systems where all this fraud is occurring, that is a dead body. That's an elephant in the room that has to be removed before you can certify this thing.
I think you've touched what you're outlining up there is the essence of how Trump will win this, because I think they're going to be able to demonstrate pre-manipulation, post-manipulation, and the process of manipulation. Therefore, the only thing that can be certified is the pre-manipulation, and I think Trump, like I said, will have won big if that's the case. So I personally see that as how this is going to unfold. Now, you've hit on something as an old human, espionage guy. Human nature is something always look very closely at, because recruiting a foreign spy, if you will, to work for the U.S. government, it requires a study of human nature to be successful at it, and so it's always something I kind of just really focus on. You've touched on such an interesting factor here, because if you look at the Secretary of State at the state level, these secretaries of state that have to certify these elections, we've seen Sidney Powell come out and make some comments like, well, if they're stupid enough to certify these things, boy, are they going to be in trouble. Something to that effect. And she did use the word stupid, so which I thought was nicely picked out as a word. And it's a study of character to see if these guys are going to go ahead. Now, most of those guys are probably lawyers and familiar with the law and all of that. So they probably recognize the depth of risk involved with certifying something for which there's very good reason to believe is false. So I think what we're going to see is those guys play out in an interesting way. Are they the hardline party, like I say, party über alles, the old Nazi party, give your life for the party, if it's required? Are they that kind of hardcore progressive communist socialist, whatever you want to call them, or are a more balanced individual mentally? And if they're that hardcore, those are the guys you're going to go ahead and certify. And they tend to live in an echo chamber where they only talk to their own people, never hear any other perspective, and they look at it and they go, well, I'm on the side of righteousness, therefore it justifies no matter what I do, including, the Nazis felt they were fully justified in slaughtering innocent Jews, and we all look at that and go, well, that's absolutely freaking crazy and evil. And this is the same thing. they fully justify what they're doing in their mind, even though it's nuts, it's crazy, it's evil, but yet that's what they're doing. So I'm very curious as to the human nature of these people, if they'll go forward and if they're perfectly willing to be a martyr, or if they're so lost in their own propaganda that they're in this fog and can't understand what's going to happen to them as a result of these actions.
Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State for Georgia.
Yeah. Raffensperger is one of those. Raffensperger is the Secretary of State from Georgia. And we're in a position where we've never been before, which is 2 sitting senators from Georgia have openly called for the resignation of the Secretary of State, which never has ever occurred before in any presidential election. So I find that Raffensperger especially now has to certify their election in January. So that's why we're going to Georgia, obviously, for that good air and also get out of the swamp air and then get down here. But then also to get the swamp creatures that made it out of Washington to places like the Secretary of State's office in Georgia. This is a new territory. I think people, the left wants to characterize this as somehow a conspiracy theory. This is 2 senators. Go ahead.
I would say it is a conspiracy, but one where we're looking at going groups like the George Soros funded groups have been pouring money into these state level elections for Secretary of State and for the chief law enforcement positions, these sorts of things in these states at these elections for precisely this reason. So is it part of an organized effort to do these things and set these guys up and have them be part of this conspiracy? Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think that Secretary of State in Georgia was not selected and funded to run for that office and win by, pure coincidence or any sort of pristine, reason. I think he was picked and backed and funded for nefarious reasons. So yeah, this is a problem. These outside groups, and that's just not one of the inherent problems with all of this stuff. Is in Congress you run every 2 years, in the Senate you run every 6 years, president every 4 years, and so everybody's always running for office. So they always need money, and particularly at the congressional level, basically whoever gets the most money, not always, but basically whoever gets the most money is going to win. And the problem is to stay in office, they need that money every year, and so they're always looking for sources. And so you have these people that once they find a source of money, they keep going back to it, trying to get more and more and more and more. And we've seen, for example, the Chinese pour money into elections. They're pouring money into elections. But who is it that safeguards us against that? Well, Congress. They self-police, if you will, on how money gets into congressional coffers. Well, they all want that money. And so, no, they don't want to block it off because that means they are going to lose their office. So it's just one of the inherent problems with the system. I mean, it's back in the Clinton days, some of the money got funded into the Clinton campaign in California through China. And there's a couple of guys sitting in jail out in California, I think still to this day, guilty of funneling money from communist China into the Clinton campaign. So, I mean, this stuff has been going on for a long, long, long time. It happens all the time. There's other countries guilty of it. I mean, I think it would be naive to suggest Saudi Arabians don't feed some money into our political system. I'm telling you right now, the Turks do it. Any of the countries, Russia, that have major funding are funneling money into the United States to try and impact policy. Which, by the way, here's one of the other funny things about it. That's all legal. It's all legal. It's called. Down on K Street, all these companies that are out there. What's the word I'm looking for? That are doing the not fundraising, but the
pay for play.
Yeah, it'll come to me in just a second. Sorry.
lobbying, but pay for play.
Lobbying, yeah, the lobbying. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Forgive me. But yeah, lobbying is 100% legal. And if Russia wants to influence policy in the United States of America, they'll pay, which they do, by the way, they pay millions of dollars every month to lobbying companies. It is 100% legal for Russia to pay a lobbying company to go to that candidate and go, gee, candidate, I'm perfectly willing to throw $10,000 in your reelection campaign, but I need you to vote this way on this. That's legal. That's legal. Turkey, Russia, China, they're all, I don't know how much money is poured into lobbying on K Street in Washington, D.C. every month, but certainly we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. Where does that money go? A lot of it goes to politicians or to their super PAC or whatever, and they all need that money every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever. And so they don't want to block that and stop it. So it's one of the inherent problems we have with our system. How to fix it? I don't know. Term limits, maybe? I don't know.
I'd like to get your feedback on this lawsuit here in Georgia that was filed in May. This was filed by a citizen group, and her name is Mary Mark. And it's basically pushing to make sure that there was a paper trail, a paper track for elections, and that paperless voting was endemically susceptible to fraud, and that this would create an audit trail that you could go back if there was, fraud, and then you could do a recount. And there is a full audit now occurring right now in Georgia. So we knew in May, before the June runoff elections, that this was a fraud. The most more holes in the Swiss cheese system that they're putting in. And then we had the white hacker cyber group DEFCON, which is all the cyber hackers of the white hats in the United States coming together and actually took apart these voting machines piece by piece, all the different hardware pieces. And they came out with a scathing 50-page report saying this thing has more holes than Swiss cheese. And then this Secretary of State still pushed it forward and bought all these new voting machines. He removed every other safeguard that other states had put in with the kind of a hybrid Dominion system, and then went full Belgrade on this thing with full foreign operation. So I just can't even imagine how Trump isn't talking about this. And the Rudy Giulianis of the world are talking about stopping the vote and injunctions against the vote counting, when they should be talking about injunctions against these secretaries of state for certifying these elections that were done with Swiss cheese voting machines.
I think you've also hit on another very interesting and important aspect. If you look since the election, what has Trump been doing and saying? And in the scheme of things, he's being very measured and very controlled. And this is one of the few periods in time where he's kind of allowing surrogates to go out and push, like the Sidney Powells, the Giulianis, and there's other people saying these same things. He's letting them go out and push, but himself being quite measured. I think that's damned interesting and very, very important. So why would he be doing that? What fits those circumstances? Why a guy like Trump, who he knows the only way to get his message to the public is to do it himself. Because if it's surrogates, for the most part, they're just getting turned off. So in this case, he's viewing those surrogates as having a good enough message that it makes its way out. And so he views that as fundamentally important, or he'd be doing something himself. So I think that inspires great confidence in me for believing in Trump will be inaugurated in January, because I think he's so supremely confident of his position that he's allowing this to play forward that way without interfering. So look at Trump's personality. I think that's deeply significant. And now, kind of fast forwarding, I think the solution is going to be exactly what, George, you were describing there. But I think that it's going to be very difficult to overcome state by state, each state government, especially where you have Democratic governors and secretaries of state and prosecutors and all of that. So I think if you fast forward, what we'll see is federal regulation or federal guidance for elections that must be obeyed at the state level, going to paper ballot, and what was called something about, the avoiding corruption in elections, orders or something to that effect, where this will be federal regulation, because I don't see how to bypass a corrupt Secretary of State who's just not going to do it, because he knows if he does it, their corruption will be uncovered and destroyed, and they'll never be able to win an election again. So I think that's the only way forward. So I think Trump really is in a commanding position. I mean, I honestly think he's got this. And secondarily, then, I think that's going to be the solution. Go to paper ballots, so there's just a complete paper trail on everything. Everything can be looked at. And if suddenly a stack of 10,000 are shoved into the system, you're going to see it. It's going to be apparent. And this having two people from each, one from each side, being able to watch it, I think those sorts of regulations at a federal level are going to be the solution. I think it's just not going to. I don't know what those regulations are. I don't know what the opposition is to having federal regulations, but there is a Federal Election Commission. So I know there are guidelines that are passed down federally to the state level that must be adhered to. So I think the solution will lie in that area.
Well, before Addie wraps here, I just want to say that we have a sort of a retreat here for federal agents, for FBI, CIA, DIA, here in Myrtle Beach. Where?
I said white hats only. No black hats allowed.
Only. White hats only. And where we have a conference, I met with several folks that were with Special Forces and then DEA. So there's a lot of DEA folks here in Myrtle Beach, and I don't want to out them, but we get a lot of people who, because they were shot at, one guy shot 12 times. But a lot of people who care, like your group, American Intelligence Reform, about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and they want to get away from the swamp air and breathe the air of, literally and figuratively, of people who want to make a change and are not going to let this one go by. We're not going to let this pitch go by. We're going to hit it. Even if it's a curve in the dirt, we're going to swing. We're not going to take another pitch. And we're going to win this thing. We cannot afford to lose. This is the last chance, really, I think. And I don't know if you agree with that, but we're bringing people here so they can meet, just so they know that they're not alone. There's been so much government trying to isolate us that we're trying to break that strategy. So your thoughts on that? And Addie, why don't you ask your final question too? Because I didn't ask a question.
Well, I would say, before you do your final question, let me comment. That I think that's great that there's groups like that are basically support groups where patriots can get together. And I do want to say you cannot believe the number of people that write me and reach out through different means to be supportive, and I'm encouraged every single day by those things that come in, and different people that financially support or just through general support, people that reach out with different types of information. And I will say, even here in the swamp, which I spent 25 years in the swamp and now basically live in the DC area, so that stench of the swamp surrounds me at all times. But it's important to kind of be here in some ways. You've got to know thine enemy, see what they're up to, and be a part of what's going on and help sway some of the movements, even things where I'm going to generally Republican things. Republicans aren't necessarily conservative. And so being part of those organizations to kind of spread the word or plant seeds in the minds of those people is important. But also, too, I would say there are a large group of people here who are dedicated patriots. And I want to make a distinction. There's a lot of people who are conservative, good guys and all of that, but they're mainly interested in money or taking care of themselves first, or some sort of reputation, or being famous, or whatever. And what I do with Americans for Intelligence Reform is unpaid. I'm a volunteer to do what I do, and I don't take a penny. In fact, I pay out of my pocket for a lot of this stuff. So, and I'm not the only one. there are many patriots around here that truly believe that God and country are more important than self. And so there's a large group of people here that, yes, there's also conservatives. There's lots of organizations, but they put other financial concerns and other things that I guess they have to in front, and are kind of concerned with patriotism as a secondary issue. But there's a large group of people that are patriots first, serve God and country first, and believe in protecting our Constitution above these other things. So there's a large group of people here very focused on that, and I would say we as a whole here are very interested in supporting Trump, very interested in supporting this upcoming election in Georgia. So for anyone listening in that sense, yeah, take heart. And your organization, gives me more confidence, and just knowing that there's more support of that nature out there, and hopefully they would be foolish enough to have me come visit at some point and say hello to the group. I'm kind of the old school. Any group that wants me is probably not a group I want to be a part of. But okay.
Daddy,
I'm sorry for interrupting, Addie. Please, yeah.
And I definitely would love to interview you in person as well if you'd be up for it sometime. But I wanted to finish off with a question about A.G. Barr. We went over him briefly, but he's playing such a key role in all of this as Attorney General. Because I've heard people say he's Trump's ace in the hole. I've also heard people say he's always been against Trump. What are your thoughts? Are you leaning towards he's coming back to the light because he knows where all the bodies are, so to speak? Is Barr, and also if he does twist the knife in Trump's back, is there a response that Trump can do, an ace in a hole for that, were that to occur, were Barr to completely turn on Trump?
Well, I think ultimately that is the key question here for how this will all unfold. Now, one of my concerns, or one of the things I put in the negative column about Barr, is that Barr was from the Bush era. He was part of the Bush family organization. So that worries me, because the Bush family and organization, generally speaking, are not friends of Trump. So that, forgive me, I guess my voice is starting to get a little worn out, so sorry.
We need to get you down here to Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, the better air. That worries me a great deal about Barr. Barr is now in a position where he's just absolutely pivotal, key, and both on the election corruption and on the Durham investigation. So if Barr were setting up Trump all along, he's played it as an absolute master. I mean, absolute master. And all he has to do is essentially nothing. If he does nothing, then Biden will become president, and we will never again have a free election in the United States of any kind. They will be controlled from the president all the way down ballot, and they're only going to allow a very few small number of Republicans to be elected so they can say there's another party, and they will have the presidency, the Senate, and the Congress starting in 2 years and maybe 4 years, but they'll take it all over, and our elections were done. Now, the way that would play forward is it takes a generation to resist that, what you would have, which is essentially a totalitarian regime. And basically, 1 generation from now, we'd have a bloody revolution and kill those guys and set up our democracy once again. That's, just historically in these countries where I've lived overseas, that's just how it works. On the other hand, if A.G. Barr is true blue, truly believes in the Constitution and protecting the Constitution of the United States, if he truly believes in rule of law, then he's going to do the right thing. And the right thing is going to be to prosecute all these guys we've talked about. I personally believe, I'm worried, but I personally believe that A.G. Barr is true blue to the law. I think his career has been spent in that. I think he, honest to God, believes in the Constitution of the United States of America as I do, and I hope everyone listening does. And he, honest to God, believes in the rule of law. If he doesn't, the United States is screwed. There's just no question. If you want me to put odds on it, I would say we're in the 80 or 90% range that Barr's going to come through for us. So I still believe in him. I've got that little corner of worry in my mind, particularly tied back to the Bushes. And famously, oh, good.
Pennsylvania trial starts Thursday.
So
That's good news.
Yeah, so we're going to be in court Thursday, and he says he's going to appeal no matter what to the federal appeals court. So we can't be in Harrisburg, but we have we'd like to have you back after the first round in the end of this week and see what your reaction is to Pittsburgh, like you said, or of Harrisburg.
Yeah, happy to. For me, the keys are Arizona and Pennsylvania, and they've got to go get those two. But like I said, Trump seems supremely confident, and no matter whether you like him or hate him or whatever, I like him and I'm a big supporter of Trump. But you cannot look at Trump and honestly say he's an idiot. He's a very smart man, and you don't become a billionaire for being an idiot. And so I just, he understands some of these things going on around. He understands the things going on around him. Now, I'm not saying he's perfect, hasn't made mistakes. He has all of those things, but again, going back to the Reagan doctrine, Reagan was one of the great presidents we've ever had, and it was if you're my 80% friend, you're my friend. And yeah, what two people are perfect, matches 100% in sync at all times? Nobody is. And so you got to be prepared to put up with that 20%. So for me, Trump is well past that threshold. So big supporter, but I think he's in command, understands what's going on, and I actually have faith in all of this because of him. Oh yeah, is that the case?
That's the case number. It's just for people who want the case number. This is brassballs.blog, one of our contributors on our network that's put this out. Just hit the wire, so you can see that these secretaries of state are in the crosshairs. So, like you said,
yeah.
So
yeah.
we'll be tuning back in with you in a couple of days or next week and finding out what happened.
Well, my prediction is that Trump's going to be inaugurated in January, and we can do a special edition for that day.
Awesome.
I hope you're right, Mr. Johnson. Thank you so much for joining George and myself today. As George said, love to follow up later on this week. And
sure.
I want to thank everybody else for tuning in. At about 300 people right now tuned in live. So a big shout out to everybody for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. If you wish to support, please subscribe to Mr. Johnson. His YouTube channel and website are in the description box below, as well as all of my links to support as well, and George's are in the description box too. Please subscribe to Mr. Johnson, myself, and Neighborhood News. And we will see you all next time, folks. Stay frosty, and God bless America.